Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining me for this week's edition of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. My name's Marty Bennett, and today it's Wednesday, September 27th, 2023, and we're going to be answering 3 questions we've been hearing from international educators over the last 7 days. And as we do each week on the Roundup, we take a look at all the different factors that are impacting our world in international education. We do that first as a result of our newsletter that comes out on Mondays. That's called All the SMIE News Fit to Share. And it takes a look at both the top social media news stories of the week as well as international education stories. It also includes a global roundup of the top news stories from around the world that we are working with that are receiving destinations for international education students. And this is our version of our hot takes on those top issues of the day or top news stories of the day. And then we take a look at in depth in a couple different ways. We look at the different themes that have developed in those news stories, and we come up with our questions that we do each week for the Roundup here on Wednesdays. And as we do each week, I like to drop in the links to first our website where you can subscribe to that newsletter if you prefer an email version of it. Also this week's latest email version of that newsletter so you can see what it looks like. If you go to that smie.consulting.org site/subscribe, you're going to be able to add your details in the subscribe section and get that email delivered to your inbox at 9 a.m. Eastern every Monday morning. Now, the other way of getting that, if you prefer, and to get your international ed news via LinkedIn, we also have a free LinkedIn version of that newsletter. And between the two now, we have well over 1,300 subscribers to the newsletter. So we're happy that it can be a part of your international edification each week. And hopefully this roundup on Wednesdays, we do it live at 1 p.m. Eastern. We know most folks can't make the live shows, and that's great. We always give you a shout out if you do pop in a comment in the chat. We'll certainly give you a shout out live here on the Roundups. But if we realize everybody's just busy and often traveling, and maybe you prefer to watch them on repeat, or maybe subscribe to the audio-only podcast version, which now has over 3,000 downloads over the time that we've been doing the podcast version of the Roundup. So thanks again for being here on Wednesday afternoon to enjoy our deeper thoughts on some of these key issues of the day. Now, following on from last week where we were talking about personalization as an important element in any solid international student recruitment strategy, we want to take a next step up and talk about email comm flows. And how do you make your email comm flow really matter? And this is probably one of the biggest missed opportunities for institutions in terms of being able to reach students using a tool that you can have much more customization than you realize perhaps or have thought possible than you maybe were able to 10, 20 years ago when email was just becoming a thing in the early 2000s as a way to communicate effectively with students. This is something now where emails can and should be sophisticated in terms of the comm flows that you have set up for your prospective students. We know that not all students, most students don't inquire about the university first before they apply. They're the shadow applicants or stealth applicants that became a real phenomenon in the late noughties and early teens. And how you respond to students like that maybe haven't gotten all those value messages about why your institution is the place for them, and potentially giving them the kind of content that is specific and generates interest and not just covers the reasons why they should apply, which is already done if the first point of contact is an application. So how does your messaging change for that kind of an audience? Does it change, or you just say, okay, here's their first point of contact, and we'll just take out all the apply now messages, and here they'll just get a series of messages after that about completing their application, about next steps, and after they've finished the application process, financial aid, all of those other things. But are those the right messages to be sending? So these are the things that we want to talk about with this kind of question. How do you make your email comm flow really matter? The way we're going to do that today is dropping in the link to the news story that references kind of what we're talking about here. It's an upcoming webinar that our friends at Keystone, or UniQuest actually, the subsidiary of Keystone, purchased a couple, 3 years ago by Keystone. It's called UniQuest. The founder of UniQuest, Rachel Fletcher, and a couple other folks from University of Dundee and Edified joined a Pi News webinar for this particular topic on student inquiries, the open goal of international recruitment. Open goal is more of a soccer reference or football world football reference. Open goal means it's an opportunity that can't be missed. It's right there in front of you. Nothing's preventing you from scoring on that open goal. It means the goalkeeper's out of position, no other defender's in the way. But this is what they're calling it, an open goal. I call it a missed opportunity if you don't take advantage of the student inquiries that you have coming in. So it's a webinar coming up on October 5th, so a week from, let's see, that's going to be next Thursday. So in terms of what that particular conversation means for you, you may be at an institution that has a fairly well set up CRM, and you're able to segment your audiences and able to get far beyond the typical dear first name kind of inquiries that most universities send. Hopefully you have opportunities to have a separate international student comm flow, because we know international students have very different needs and how would they perceive a value, if that's a value of, if affordability is a value of your institution, because at the undergraduate level, domestic students have access to a wide assortment of financial aid, and that reduces the overall cost to attend to a much more reasonable level. That message of affordability doesn't apply to international students, because they're not eligible for that same federal aid that you generously give to your domestic students. So how do you balance that value? If affordability is a value, how do you talk about that in terms of a different way for an international audience? So this is a part of the conversation that our institutions need to start having if they are only using the same comm flow for every level of student. Maybe just switching out undergraduate for graduate, or international for domestic students in terms of the kind of messages that go out. So this, I think, is something that is an opportunity for any institution. If you have questions about why we need to be as sophisticated as this might, or as I've talked about, the folks that are doing this from UniQuest, Dundee. UniQuest started in the UK, and most of their clients are either British or European, but they have expanded into the U.S. and other markets in recent years. And it's always been a passion area of mine that the communication we send to students should be appropriate, should be personalized, and should be on point for them and their particular audience. And for most institutions, that's not happening. It's not happening because either there's not the bandwidth to develop the separate comm flows. There's no thought really put behind how messaging goes out to this group versus domestic groups. And there's not even opportunities or thought given into, should we segment out for students from different countries? We have different comm flows for students in different academic programs. Why can't we do something similar from students that are coming from certain countries where we know we have significant students from that country, and get very personal with them and show that we acknowledge them as individuals and that they have a different set of needs and potentially concerns that the average student would not have. So that would be very different than what a U.S. student might need to hear about campus visits. Pushing out campus visit messages to international students whose addresses are clearly not in the United States is just silly. It's wasted effort, and it's an effort that could be replaced by a message that's more appropriate for international students, focusing on the other virtual parts of your visit strategy, of virtual open houses you might be hosting, regular opportunities to have virtual tours given to you on demand. So those are kind of opportunities that do exist, but they're never really focused on specifically for intended audiences. And this is something that I've struggled with at institutions I've been at where I'm not particularly responsible for the messaging out. I have input, I make my suggestions, but whether it actually happens or not, that's oftentimes beyond me. But where I have had control, it has been a real concerted effort by those that are involved in messaging out, not just the students that are responding, student workers that are responding to emails that come in, but our staff responding to the different international messages that students from abroad that might be coming in. So why does that matter? Because students want to be valued as individuals. They want to be recognized as having specific needs and concerns that they would like to be seen as those individuals with those needs, and that responded to accordingly. And this is something that we really must, if we're going to be really impactful with our messaging out, with our ComFlow strategies to our international students. We should be doing this already with domestic students, because every student group that we might be dealing with that has different sets of issues, there should be appropriate communication to those students that addresses their concerns and their issues. And internationals are no different because the regulatory issues that they face, the financial restrictions that they're under, the employment opportunities that they can or can't do while they're enrolled in the United States, the travel restrictions, all of these things impact them that don't impact domestic students of any kind. So why are you not having communication that speaks to those needs and recognizes them, that potentially after they're admitted, talking through ways that they can get connected with our current student association that represents them on campus, ways that they can, before they're admitted, that they can hear from students from their own region, from their own country via video content or testimonials that they've given in short, either web-based text form or video content that you have available. Sharing that, embedding that in your communication out to them. Why wouldn't you do that if you have that opportunity? And oftentimes, if you're in a larger admissions office where you're one person and there aren't really the resources to dedicate toward that, you're oftentimes fighting an uphill battle to get your content that your international students want and need to hear out to them in a timely and effective and efficient manner. Whereas if a CRM is built and recognizes and identifies certain criteria in your database of students, that students from X country should get this message, students from Y country should get this message, students from X country gets a different message. If those are all available and programmed into your ComFlow, then that can happen. But if it's you just manually having to send it out, all these information, all these individual emails out covering these different topics at different times during the year, you don't have bandwidth to do that if you're a one-person shop. You really don't. So you need to invest in the time and the resources, hopefully from, if you're a one-person shop, whoever's managing your CRM or managing ComFlows, if it's Slate, if it's Salesforce, whatever it is, you have someone that you can work with to develop the content that can go and create a stream of messages that are appropriate and directed to the students that you're specifically trying to enroll. If that's your international is your area of responsibility. So very much looking forward to this webinar. Unfortunately, I'll be in Indonesia, so I'll have to watch the recorded version. It'll be let's see, October 5th at it's British time, 9 a.m. Eastern, so it will be close to 8 p.m. After a fair day in Indonesia, where I'll be in the next week. So hopefully I'll probably be catching the recording of that. So I want to make these kinds of resources available to you, even if it just sparks a conversation on your campus with your leadership about the need for this kind of personalized approach towards your communication with your prospective students. One thing that UniQuest does have is a survey that's delivered by Edified called Annual Inquiry Experience Tracker, EET. And that is an annual study that has been given to 128 institutions now that are receiving students that are institutions that want to be mystery shopped by UniQuest, by Edified, and that tracks their responses from student inquiries from the different institutions that are are being considered for this. So very interesting topic, and one that I think is key to really an overall well-run communication flow to international students that is separate, that is personalized, and can be segmented down on different levels beyond academics into country level and perhaps interest levels that may have been expressed at different points in the year, and have topics throughout it that can be talk to the needs of individual international students. So really important topic to start our conversation with today. The next one is a topic that, for those of you who followed my journey with international ed and international enrollment management, this is one that resonates with me quite significantly, and it's what's in a name when it comes to an organization. Now, this is all about AIRC and the new addition to their name. It gives us not flashbacks, but those who have been in the international ed industry for quite a while know that NAFSA is an acronym that used to stand for National Association of Foreign Student Advisors. And that organization was specifically for those people that worked with students that were going abroad, but mostly a U.S.-centered organization, and with international student and scholar offices. That was the original niche of international ed that NAFSA really spoke to, National Association of Foreign Student Advisors. But it had become much more than that by the late 90s, early 2000s, where it was included, study abroad folks were included in the mix of that. There was, in addition to international student scholars, there was an international enrollment management section. There was a teaching, learning, and scholarship section. There was a leadership and service, leadership and service knowledge community as well. It was carved out of this, that kind of defined the different elements of what international education is and who's under the umbrella of international education in the United States, but also globally. So NAFSA changed its name to, instead of NAFSA, the Association of Foreign Student Advisors, to, or the National Association of Foreign Student Advisors, excuse me, to NAFSA, the Association of International Educators. So they changed their name to be more reflective of their membership, of all the different areas of international education that they had identified as priority areas for international education. So AIRC has changed their name. Their new name is AIRC, the Association of International Enrollment Management. So this new name is, I think, an excellent reflection of where AIRC stands in the wider world of international education. They were founded in 2008 as an agency accreditation body that was very much for U.S. institutions to find certified agents that AIRC would certify, and there's a process that agencies can go through to become certified. It's expensive, but if they go through this process, it captures a lot of the bigger players in the industry, all the aggregators, some of the major master agents in different countries, and some very productive agencies in India and throughout East and South Asia. So that's the primary focus of AIRC, was initially agency accreditation. So U.S. institutions that were coming to grips with trying to do international education and trying to identify potential partners in key markets that could help them recruit students. At the time in 2008, the agency working with educational agents was not a very common practice. Less than a third of institutions in 2008, 2009, 2010 were working with international agents, educational agents. But AIRC was formed to identify those agencies that have a proven track record, keeping in mind that when this started in 2008, the Brits, the Canadians, and Australians had been using educational agents for in some countries up to 2 decades before AIRC was founded in the early mid 80s, when Australia really began tracking educational agents, certifying agents, and that type of thing. So AIRC was for U.S. institutions really opened the door to institutions that in the mid to late noughties were really starting to engage more with international student recruitment, and were really trying to find pathways, because the the traditional methods for many state institutions, for example. They weren't really traveling, that weren't the flagship institutions, weren't really traveling abroad. And they were looking for new ways to find students to offset domestic shortfalls in revenue that were coming from their states, and then agents became a big part of that. China became a huge focus of AIRC, and in the early days, and agencies in AIRC that AIRC certified received a lot of attention from U.S. institutions, and beyond that as well. But this organization has evolved quite a bit in the last decade, I would say. In the 10 years that's since 2013, when there was a hearing, and NACAC was involved heavily in this in terms of they had a code of conduct, best practices for their members. That one of the features of that for NACAC members was you can't work with educational agents, commission-based agents. NACAC changed its tune, and then a couple of years later, 3-4 years later, Education USA changed the tune, and being able to work with educational agents became much more common, much more seen as above board and appropriate. And what I think, in terms of AIRC's development as an organization, it certainly is no longer just for U.S. institutions. There are Canadian, UK, other Australian universities that come to this conference, AIRC conference, to connect with agencies that might be looking to help universities build their brands in particular markets. But I think as AIRC's evolved, and the kinds of institutions that it's working with has evolved, the kinds of priorities of institutions have shifted from not just the recruitment side, which is probably one of the most significant steps forward this organization could have taken, is the focus in recent years has become much more on the entire enrollment management picture for international students, and what universities need to have, not just to bring them in the door, but to take care of the ones that come to their campuses and make sure they have services in place to meet those needs. And when those needs are met, students are happy, students go home and tell their friends, and so on and so on, and the increases the traffic and students coming to those institutions. So for me, this is a natural evolution of AIRC in terms of its particular focus as an institution, and I've seen this happen too, not just with the universities that are part of AIRC are becoming more savvy when it comes to developing full life cycle planning for international students, from not just the initial admissions piece and getting to campus, but orientation, advising, programming, not just within the international office, but across the campus, offices that deal with international students. They all have an important part to play in the eventual success of that student and becoming a successful alumni of their institution. So the institutions that approach international, as we're doing here at UNLV, are really focused on this entire what I call international enrollment life cycle. Not just enrollment management isn't just getting them from first year to second year. It's managing international students throughout their enrolled time at the university till the time they become successful graduates. And all of those pieces can be triggers positively or negatively in whether a student's going to succeed in their journey and appreciate what the institution's done in helping them get there. And this reflection in AIRC with the change of name is important. I put a lot of value in AIRC as an institution. 10, 15 years ago when I was working with Education USA, that wasn't the case. There was actually, before the State Department opened the door to allow Education USA advisors to work with educational agents, there were universities that would not engage with agents because Education USA said that they wouldn't work with agents. But now we're in a much more open society in terms of, in the international ed world, in terms of its acceptance for agents. Education USA can work with agents of particular institutions at their events. Education USA advisors attend agent fairs as well as in a promotional aspect for the services that they provide at Education USA. There's definite a higher sense of need for willingness to cooperate and cooperation in between institutions and agencies and different partners like Education USA, like universities that are looking to partner with overseas institutions. Education USA plays that role too now. So I think there's greater recognition that more of the agents are engaged in this in international education beyond just that enrollment piece, because it's in their best interests that the students that they're sending to universities that are partners with them are institutions where they're going to be taken care of, and that there are now agencies that are helping universities that they're partnering with in that transition period when they're coming to campus, but also after they've enrolled, and helping to stay in touch with them and aid them along the way if needed, and just also showing that duty of care throughout their time. That shows commitment that agency is making to their students, and that reflects well certainly with parents. It reflects well with institutions when we see partners that we are looking to engage with that are already actively continuing that journey with their former advisees even after they've enrolled in the United States. That says a lot, because it's the agencies that also are benefiting by having their students be successful at the institutions where they're placed, but the universities are also more highly concerned with that student services piece now than they were 10, 15 years ago. So I'm really excited about this name change, because it signals a great intent. And kudos to Brian Whalen and the leadership board at AIRC in terms of, and Derek Alex, the current president of AIRC from University of Houston. They've all been involved in this transition, past presidents as well, Jing Luan, who I'm working with on a book chapter that's going to be debuting around AIRC conference in December. More on that next when it comes available. But there's a real sense within the organization at AIRC that there's much more to what they do and should be doing to help members in understanding the full life cycle picture for international students on their campuses. So kudos to AIRC for taking this big step. And Brian, I know, this is kind of his swan song conference. Brian Whalen, the current executive director, he'll be stepping down from his role as executive director after the December conference, and setting up whoever takes the role next for success long term. So congratulations to AIRC on this important step forward for them as an organization and for our field. Now, the third area of the day is a question that seems a little odd. Why is Marty talking about the UK general election that isn't happening until at the earliest 2025? So why is this a priority? So let's put it all in perspective here. There's a couple different issues that are percolating to the surface here with the UK. We've already seen the current Home Secretary in the last 6 months has put her foot down and said we are not going to allow dependents of non-PhD students to come in with the student when they come for study. That's already happening. There are huge markets for that coming from India, coming from Nigeria, that those students that are coming for one-year master's programs would also be bringing families with them after January 1st, that they will no longer be able to do that. We talked a couple weeks ago, 3 weeks ago now, in the newsletter, there was a story about how UK universities are adding December intake to get one last group of those master's degree students with dependents in before the rule change takes effect on January 1st. So UK universities are being creative in terms of trying to get around these new prohibitions that the Home Office and the government are putting in place. You now are seeing there was an article that the PI put out that what our UK international educators want to see in manifestos in the next election. And for those not familiar with the UK political scene, there are three parties, Labour, Tories, and Liberal Democrats, and each of them have constituencies, and those are the three main parties that make up the Parliament in England, and other in Scotland and Wales, Northern Ireland. They have their own parliaments as well. That this is as the kind of the catch-all, but they have these three parties kind of rule the roost, and it's been primarily between Labour and Tories over the last couple decades. Lib Dems have never held a prime minister position in England, but that could change. We don't know if it will or not. But each of these parties develops manifestos that represent how that party views this, whatever topic it is, whether it's foreign affairs, whether it's economic development, whether it's immigration, whether it's international education, all of those. Each of these parties will develop manifestos that represent their core beliefs as a party. So what will happen in the next general election? There's a lot of uncertainty in the higher ed community in terms of what direction it goes. If the Tories stay in power, does that mean more restrictions? If Labor comes back into power, will that mean a more opening up of opportunities for international education? There's a lot still to be decided. We also saw a story this past week that visa fees just jumped to almost $600 US for an international student that wants to study in the UK to get their student visa there. So all of that, all of these topics that are bubbling to the surface are really leaving a lot of educators in England kind of realizing this is their time to really get in front of their the potential leadership in these parties that they can convince that expanded international education opportunities are an important driver for UK growth, economic growth, but also cultural well-being and all of the different pieces of why we talk about international education as a benefit to our students and to our communities. So I'll be eager to see what that looks like. One of the articles that I've referenced here is from University World News by a couple of colleagues, Louise Nickel and Alan Preece, called "Ticking Time Bomb of Foreign Students Must Be Diffused with Data." And it references what's happening in the UK with HESA data and HEPI data, and when that comes out, UCAS data as well. But also talks about how other countries are dealing with the issue of data and how that's actually driving public policy, as we saw in Australia. We saw the data that helped Australian universities that address the issue of dodgy providers, that students who enroll in a university program and then switch to a lower quality, sometimes some would say dodgy provider, where it would cost less, and they just use that as their step to immigration. That data has helped Australian government make that switch. So there's also it also gave them data was used to make the decision on cutting back on the work hours that had been up to 40 hours a week for international students, back down to 25 hours a week now that back to pre-pandemic levels. So their numbers have come back up, but now they're trying to set the stage for further growth, and we'll see if that happens with Australia, or if they've hit a wall. They're not quite back up to pre-pandemic levels in terms of new arrivals, but looks like that they're on track to be there by the end of the next year. The numbers that we're dealing with in Australia are as important as what we're seeing in Canada, more so important in Canada. When you see those numbers, the 900,000 potential international students enrolled in university and vocational college level education in Canada, that there's talks of caps, and that data is one of the main reasons why there's caps. So in England, it's certainly no different. They're going to be looking at the numbers, particularly in the next year, 2024, as in the lead up to the election, which as earliest it will happen will be January of 2025. So why are we mentioning this now in September 23? Just because these are the kinds of topics in England that receive a whole lot of attention whenever there's a news story or something that gets in the way, grabs the headlines. Students that are there's also the issue of international students facing financial hardship rising because of lack of access to housing and the affordability issues there, the students that are at risk, and how institutions need to develop these hardship funding, specialist hardship funding increasing that level of funding for international students in the UK. These are all the kinds of issues that percolate to the surface pre-election, and that will become rallying cries for universities to address, and hope that universities can help play a leading role in convincing leadership in different parties that their cause is just and that deserves funding, deserves changes in regulations, whatever the case may be. So this takes time in the UK in terms of developing the manifestos for the different parties, so that they don't. They have their own, each party has their own leader, and whoever's party gets the most seats in Parliament, that's the one who becomes president. But that member, party member who's their party leader, has to be elected from their home district, wherever it is, in order to be elevated to prime minister should they win the most seats. So it's high stakes, and like in the U.S., we're already debates are happening for the Republican Party that's leading up to the November 24 elections. So you can see we're seeing a little bit of that and how important that they're developing their policies and that will represent their party in the elections in 2024, particularly when the primaries start happening in January, February. So lots going on, and certainly politics impacts what we do in our field, and we need to advocate as much as we can, as I know my British colleagues are now with their elected representatives, and making sure that their voices are heard, and that the issues that are most important to them are addressed by the leadership of the different parties. So that's all we have for you today on the Midweek Roundup. Thank you again for making this Roundup a part of your international edification, and we hope to see you around the way. Next week we'll be in Indonesia. We'll be doing some graduate fairs for through Education USA, and Wednesday we'll be in let's see, where will I be? I will be in Indonesia, attending a fair, hopefully in Malang, in Indonesia. So until next time, live from Indonesia, we'll be back with you next week. So until then, have a great day. Cheers.